So when I was a really young child, like many young children are, I was fascinated by dinosaurs. And one of the things that I really liked about dinosaurs, besides the fact that they looked really cool, was that they had these awesome names like Tyrannosaurus Rex and Triceratops and Megalodon. And it was, it sort of sounded like the Saturday cartoons. And I got into them when I was about two and a half. And, they had the picture books and all of this. And somehow I could make out the sounds and the names. And so I'd chirp out the names. And some of my very first memories are of being excited about dinosaurs. And when I was three, my parents took me to an alternate universe. We got in the car in the station wagon, and Dad had laid out a big long sleeping bag in the back of the station wagon, and there was a cooler with sandwiches in it, and my sister and I got to take turns in the back on the and being next to the cooler, which also had sodas in it. And so we drove for an entire 3 hours. I lived very close to Washington D.C. in Maryland, and we went down south. We went down to past Richmond and over to the east, and we went to this place where some distant cousins of ours had a house, a summer house, or a second house. And I guess that speaks to some privilege in my family. So I'll just acknowledge that and bow to that. But they had this house on a river, a tidal river near the Chesapeake Bay. And this was my very first time down there. And as I came driving into as we as a family came driving into the area where there was a group of houses on the river, all owned by lots of various friends and other distant family members. But there were signs up along the side of the road that said, "Hey, Bruce, seen a Tyrannosaurus Rex lately?" Or, "Hey, Bruce, did you pet a Triceratops?" And I just thought, oh my goddess, I have gone to heaven. What is this place? Where am I going? And when I got there, there were all these cousins that I had never met before. And they were actually pretty distant cousins, but my mom had been very close with my Aunt Leba. And I just remember being like, wow, it was on the water. And at night, there were all these toads that were hopping around, and everybody was really kind and patient with me. It wasn't like being at home in Maryland. And there were boats to go out on and all of that. But then there was also my cousin Emily, who was a year older than I was, and she knew a lot of stuff. She knew how to take a crab net and go out. You walk out on the pier and you look down in the water, and there would be blue crabs that would be, they'd use their pinchers, their claws, and they'd be picking at the barnacles on the posts of the piers. And if you dipped your net down just right, you could actually dip under them and pick them off the piling. And some of them were really big and huge. Now, when I was three, that was kind of beyond my capabilities, but we kept on going back down to this magical place by the river pretty much once a year, once a summer, and we'd see these cousins. And so through the years, I got to know Emily, and as I got a little bit more coordination, she taught me how to crab and how to fish. And one of the things that I remember from our time together is that we didn't really talk very much. We just did stuff together, hunted frogs, went riding around on our bikes, went up to the pool, da 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 da. It was a really sweet, uncomplicated time of life. And Emily was kind of like a constant, in my life, that sort of a touchstone, somebody, she's very much of a tomboy. She could do anything, and it was just fun. It was natural. It was easy. It was, and not something that you would question, and also extremely, extremely comforting. And we would go to this place every summer. We ended up starting to spend the whole month of August down there pretty much every single year. And I still feel very deeply attached to this area of this certain river next to the Chesapeake Bay. Well, anyways, so, even though we're distant cousins, I've always felt like Emily was, just deep family. Like I've got my first cousins who also lived in Virginia, about 3 hours away. And, going down to see them was always such an excitement. But those were my mom's sister's kids, all four of them. Good fun loving people. And I kind of always had held things in that light of, oh, this is family. And um, and so, anyways, fast forward 54 years, something like that, and my first cousins and my direct family had started to take family reunions. And most of the time, when we started to do it and we were deciding what we were going to do, everybody wanted to go to the beach. And I was like, wait a second, why don't we go back to this place? Why don't we go back to, this place where we've got, other cousins and fun things you can do. You can go out on boats. You go to the beach and you just sit around, just drinking in the sun and getting burned and dehydrated. And yeah, you get to ride the waves for a few minutes, but what do you really do? At the river, you can get on your bikes, you can go to the pool, you can play tennis, you can go out on boats, you can catch crabs, you can go fishing. It was just like a universe of fun things. And plus, there's all these people. When we were kids, it was all outdoor stuff. Now it's cocktail hour at some other person's house. And so I voted for, to go back to this sweet area, but I got outvoted. I got outvoted for 4 years in a row. And then finally, the can got kicked to me to organize the family reunion. And I said, well, you know what? If I'm going to do it, I'm going back to this area. So I reached out to my cousins and to these other folks, to Emily and her sister, and I said, "All right, I want to make this family reunion happen, and it's going to happen, and this is going to be great." And I was struck by, I probably hadn't seen or Emily at that point in maybe 20 years. I mean, it had been a long time, or really hung out. But once again, this is like a constant in your life. Anywho, um, I was struck by how enthusiastically she was, and her sister were like, "We're going to make this happen. We're so excited that you all want to come down here. We're just going to make this happen." And so ultimately we did. And in doing this, this was about a year before, this is in 2019, in pulling this all together. Emily, I found out that, things about her life and what she was checking into, the kind of work that she's doing. And it was like, wow, a lot of the things that she's doing are very much aligned with meditation, what I've been doing. Fun, cool. And then we just found, as we continued to, this entry of putting this trip together, for the family, that there was so much in common, and we were having a really, really fun time connecting about other things in life, about spirituality, about wellness, about on and on and on about the flow of life. So, anyways, things go along, and this last summer, I was able to coordinate a second trip down to this area. And her birthday is just a few days before my birthday, even though she's a year older, which back when we were little seemed like, a different generation. And we just did this second time around, also just more and more, just really, really appreciating each other. And I was like, wow, it's so great to get to know you anew and again at this time of life. And so I was down there with my Aunt Angela, my mother's sister. And Aunt Angela, she's one of those gals that really likes to, well, she's a Southern lady. So, anyway, she said to me, she said, now, Bruce, you and Emily are like some old married couple together. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. That's, whatever. Um, anyways, long and short is that as I was driving north from Virginia to go up to my farm in New Hampshire, where I'm kind of living these days, my sister, I spoke with my sister on the ride up north, and she said to me, she goes, well, Aunt Angela thinks you're going to marry Emily. And I just laughed. I said, that is the silliest thing in the world. That's crazy. Emily and I, are just really good buds, and we're deep family. There's no way that that could happen. Of course, we're distant family. In any event, so that, talked to my sister. That was south of Washington, D.C. And then as I got north of Washington, D.C., which is no easy feat, the thought arose in my mind, well, isn't that funny that Aunt Angela would think that? Isn't that cute? And but I just kind of laughed at it again. And then all of a sudden, about 10 minutes later, I'm driving along, and the thought arose about Emily. Well, what if? What if? And all of a sudden, there was this new take. There was this freshness. There was this innocence in the moment. And it was like when that happened, I felt my heart open, my chest expand, like, oh, wait a second. Hmm. And there was a certain kind of a sense of an alignment around that. And it wasn't like, the bells went off and, the voice of God came through the clouds and bells and whistles and rockets and things like that. It was very much kind of like, oh, of course, that would be, really amazing and beautiful. And and it reminded me, it was so clear. It reminded me of what it's like when in our meditation practice we have an insight and we see into the possibility of things and kind of the simplicity of things. Well, it took me about 2 weeks to kind of screw up my courage and give Emily a call and tell her how I was feeling or what I'd opened up to and whether she might be interested. And she said she needed some time and so on and so forth. But actually, we have opened up to really, well, we love each other. And it's a whole new and fresh, I mean, it was surprising and shocking to her. So this is really fun and beautiful and new news in my life. But I think that the thing and the reason why I wanted to go through that long explanation is because we can hold something in one way for decades, for the entirety of our lives. Like the way that we hold ourselves as being, hey, there's a me here and a that out there. There's I'm an individual and the world is around me instead of, oh, there's an open, connected flow that's happening. This is a huge shift of perspective to take, but it can shift in a moment, and we can have insights about our lives and the way things are. I love that the word dharma, the most basic definition of the word dharma, is literally it means the way things are, how things are. We feel into and we sense, and it's not something that we've put all the blocks together and we've reasoned it out and we understand it and we get it and we've mathematically figured it out. It's more like, oh, oh, right, of course, this is it. There's some kind of it's more felt than understood. There's a sense of maybe some kind of an energetic alignment around that. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take a break from me yakking at you, and I'm going to kind of open it up and see if anybody would be willing to share about a time in their life when something, when things, a perspective shifted, and there was a feeling of, oh, wow, wait a second, this feels more aligned with how things actually are. With the, not just with the experience, the lived, felt sense of what an insight has felt like in your life. Is there anybody that would be willing to share an experience that they've had of feeling an insight? It is actually a little bit of a, I think it's an important thing to get familiar and intimate with what an insight actually is, with the process of insight. I mean, we call this insight meditation. And insights are, Chogyam Trungpa likes to say, insights are like accidents, and meditation makes us accident prone. We begin to see into the nature of how our experience just rolls along and unfolds moment by moment. We begin to see that changing nature, or maybe we begin to see the impersonal nature, that it's kind of just doing itself. There's not necessarily somebody behind the curtain with all of that. I'm wondering if anybody has had an insight with their meditation practice that they'd be willing to share, an insight about the nature of their life or their experience. I'll try again. We'll see if we get any fish with this. It's the same piece of bait.
It's Gabrielle.
Gabrielle, please.
Ah, bonsoir. Good to see you again.
Oh, bonsoir, Gabrielle. Hello.
Um, a lot of my early life was quite brutal, both emotionally and physically. And I was always enamored of what Nietzsche was known for saying, that which does not kill me can only make me stronger, because I didn't know how else to make sense of what I was going through. And it wasn't until I began to study with Meg Gawler, who's a great teacher,
Mm-hmm.
who teaches deep self compassion and it helped me to realize that my feelings and my needs actually are important. I was getting that all mixed up with ego. Oh, I shouldn't want this or need that because that's just ego or it's attachment. And one night I had this dream in which I thought I was meditating. So I was dreaming that I'm meditating. And
Mm.
the thought came to me, That which does not make me stronger can only kill me.
Mm.
And I realized that I had compromised so much of my life in survival mode and not making my needs and my feelings and my wishes a priority. And it was slowly killing me inch by inch. So I still haven't quite figured out the balance between valuing this temporary self that I am and ego or attachment. But I do know enough to more to value my feelings and my needs now. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Gabrielle. That's beautiful. And I'm happy for you that, you've had that clarity. And I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to share what it felt like in that moment. Do you remember what your experience of maybe your body or your energy, your sense of yourself was in that moment? Was there a sensation of like a relaxation or a calm or an upliftment? Yeah, what did it actually feel like? What was the lived sense of it in the moment?
Well, when I woke up from that dream, um,
Mhm.
it was not a sweet experience. I had a really good long boohoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of grief,
Mm-hmm.
regret, and even a sense of shame. Why was I so stupid for so long?
Mm-hmm.
That sense. So it was a big long boo-hoo, honestly. But as I went through the rest of the day and a couple of days after, then I began to feel so much lighter,
Mm-hmm.
light and freer, and had a much stronger sense of just the everyday joy of life, stronger than I'd felt in a long time.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. And so just speaking to when we have insights, sometimes it can unlock things that have been stuck for a very long time. And that release of energy can allow things like grief to come to the surface, fear, um, whatever emotion might have been. But then typically there's some period of integration and some sense of lightening up, some sense of aligning so that maybe we're not holding things so much, but life and the flow of it is holding it as us. So thank you very, very much. Ed, having heard Gabrielle, is there anybody else that would like to share before I move on?
I can share something, Bruce, about
Yep.
about um, a practice. When I first started practicing, I would do 9-day meditation retreats a couple times a year. And for the first couple years of the retreats, I had a lot of grief and just things coming up, like we're talking about. Just being still was um, kind of a releasing process for me. So it was a little uncomfortable to be grieving and kind of crying and going through stuff on the cushions during retreat. So I think there was quite a bit of resistance going on at the same time. And that held true for many, like at least 5 years of practice. And then I remember very distinctly, I can almost remember the day it was that I was sitting on the cushion in the middle of a retreat, and there was this moment where the story I was carrying about my life kind of broke, and there was this realization that I thought for the insight that came was that this is the first time I've actually been present that I can remember
Mm.
in my life. That I really felt the presence of just being and not carrying the story. And it was so, I mean, this was in 1997. And, it just has always stuck with me. It's a very profound insight to suddenly have that experience and the body sensation of what presence felt like without carrying this weight of story. for so long. So it was a turning point that I never ever went back to the old. I mean, I definitely have visited the stories before and since, and and I don't expect to be not involved in the story of life, of my life, the grief and what have you. But it just changed from that day on. I never quite had that same dread of carrying it, and the insight was profound. It was profound. It was a true marking point of my practice.
Wow. Wow. Thanks so much. And as you, again, so you felt this, there was kind of this lightness that came with it at some point, and was there a feeling of like an alignment with truth, or an alignment with naturalness?
Sorry, my heater has kicked on, so if you hear this background noise, that's what's happening. Yeah, it just felt extremely different from the times of sitting before that point.
Yeah.
So the feeling of it in the body was just that there was less emotional discharging, and just more simple presence, without a lot of complication and um, a lot of stuff, emotional baggage. So I would say yes, it felt lighter, and there was a lot of joy in the fact that it just felt freer. There was a freedom, and so all these years later, I remember that very clearly, how that felt. The moment that it shifted, the moment that I realized that I wasn't in the story, I was in presence. It was like, wow. And it's hard to talk about. I mean, I'm sure some people who've been practicing for a while have some kind of experience like that, like it's a point at which you go over or through, and then you're changed from it. It's like, wow. I finally think that I healed quite a bit of that discomfort
Hmm.
and sorrow or grief, like Gabrielle was talking about. So
Yeah. And it's amazing how that healing can happen kind of in a moment. All of a sudden, we've shifted perspective, you know. And once the old conditioning might come back, but you can't fully go back. Yeah. So beautiful. Thank you. So this is there's insights that are large, there's insights that are small. Actually, as we begin to open up and become more just connected to this simple receptivity, to this simple presence that Marcia was pointing to, we begin to find that, it's kind of like when we take the extra baggage out of the way, insights are happening all the time. There's kind of a connectedness to the truth and the simplicity of the moment. And as we begin to do this, it's important not to grab onto or make something, ultimately out of the insight. We've experienced this, there's been some kind of a shift. But if we then sort of concretize and create a new me, that's a new, now I've got the new me, but that's some static me that's adrift in the sea of the change. We're preventing ourselves from the next insight that wants to come. So first, step number one is, can we become familiar with what insight begins to feel like? What's the resonance? What's the frequency? What's the feeling or the aliveness of insight? And as we do that, and we come into presence more and more, we begin to tease out and become more sensitive to the fact that insight is actually something that can be happening on an ongoing basis. And I remember I was on a 3-month retreat, and this wonderful teacher, Joseph Goldstein, who's one of the elders of the Vipassana, the insight tradition in the West, was my interviewing teacher. So, you're in silence all the time, but every 3 days you go in and you have a 15-minute interview. And the night before my interview with Joseph, I had had a humdinger of an experience and an insight. I mean, it was a lunker. It was a fun one. It was a bit of a wild ride that ended up in some beautiful peace. Um, and so I was all excited for my interview the next day, and I went in and I said, Joseph, I've had this experience and then an insight, and so exciting, and I'm all ramped up about it. He's like, yeah. And then what happened? I was like, but Joseph, I had this huge insight and experience. I mean, what do I do with it? And Joseph said, let it go. And I said, oh, come on. I mean, this is important. And he said, for God's sakes, Bruce, you don't want to be dragging around a corpse. and that's and that's what it is. So can we stay fresh to the fact that really, I think why they call this insight meditation is because every moment is kind of a gift of life if we're meeting it with that sense of maybe humility or freshness or possibility, because we haven't attached onto and concretized anything. The mind in its most basic and natural state is simply a still receptivity. We might call it a balance of mind or an open equanimity that's just available to experience. And as experience arises and happens, it simply receives and it includes that experience. And if you were to ask me what the definition of love is simply the action of love is to include. When something arises, a thought or one of our senses, it's just received and included. This is the first step in love. It's accepted. Um, the I want to give an example of how we can just be kind of, in a sense, is accepting loving, is receiving loving, is being present to our experience and just available to it, a way of allowing the appropriate response to occur, because the moment has met itself in a very sort of sincere and genuine way, in a sense, through us. As a matter of fact, there was a Zen master, Hui Ning, the sixth Zen master of China, who, when he was asked his definition of enlightenment, he said, enlightenment is an appropriate response. And a truly appropriate response is where the moment meets itself without confusion, without a sense of separation, and without concretizing and, in a sense, pulling ourselves out of the flow. So, I'll give you a little example. I've mentioned this in previous Dharma talks, but I keep coming back to it. It was this moment I was at the Del Oro Theater, and I had gone there. It was the Star Wars movie Rogue One. And it was in the summer. It was a 9:30 showing, and I was the only person in the theater, the only person in the movie theater. And the credits or the previews started playing, and I'm all nestled down there, and I'm just in the right spot of the theater, and I'm so excited. for the movie to begin, and nobody on either side to worry about sharing the elbow rest with, and nobody behind me to kick the seat, or somebody sitting in front of me taller than I am. It just was all nestled in. And just as the previews stopped, door opens, movie's just beginning, and three people walk in. And I was like, oh, all right, whatever. It's no longer a private screening for the movie mogul, but what the heck. And they walked up the aisle and down the aisle, and up the aisle and down the aisle, and then they stopped. And they stopped at my row. And they came walking over, and lo and behold, they sat in the seats that were directly next to mine. No more, no more free open elbow rest. And my mind just went, what? What are they thinking? This is an empty movie theater, and they're going to sit directly next to me, the only person in it. And so, anyways, um, uh, my I just there was an immediate contraction, and I started going into what's the matter with these people, where were they brought up, what the hell. And but then, thank goddess for our practice, something helped me drop my attention into my body. And I touched my, and just this simple dropping out of the stories and into the heart space. Initially, my attention was drawn to my heart space, and just feeling that it was contracted, just the truth of feeling this contraction of my heart. And so to feel that, there was a little bit of just a relaxation around the heart space. And I had just kind of the insight that arose was sort of like an intuition in the moment. And there was just something that, was almost like a feeling of, I don't think I should move. As I thought about it later, if I could have gotten up, I could have moved, I could have walked away, and I probably would have been telling myself a lot of stories about it. But I didn't move, and and then I stayed my attention stayed in my body, and just being with the truth of the moment. And then the next thing that happened was there was a sense of there was sort of a rational thing that came up, which was, well, these these are perfect seats. Oh wait, no. The next thing that arose was something out of left field, something very odd. I don't think in terms of God or deity very often, but the thought arose as my heart opened up a little bit more. Well, what if God had sent these people here and they're supposed to sit next to me? And that was very startling. And that had a feeling of kind of a sense of alignment to it. And then the next thing that arose was something, out of my intellect, which was a very rational, reasonable thing that was like, well, these are perfect seats. They're right in the middle and not too far back or forward. Why wouldn't they want to sit here? And as soon as that thought came through, that opened up some more space, and a sense of generosity arose. I could feel that, an expansion of the heart, and the belly opened up. And it was like, well, I can share. And as soon as that happened, then everything came into kind of alignment, and there was a sense of joy, because all of a sudden I wasn't sitting, next to annoying, unthoughtful people. I was sort of sitting next to friends. And all of this happened in the space of a couple of seconds. And it all happened because nothing was ever held on to. There was just a flow. And so, with our insight practice, we can begin to open up to a flow of experience, a flow of letting things kind of take their own natural course, a flow of letting things self organize, a flow of not having to do all the work ourselves, kind of a peace and ease and a lightening up, like Marcia was saying. You don't have to get it right. You can allow things to take their natural course. And when you're with them with this state of basic presence, then there is the appropriate response arises in and of itself. The moment meets itself in the most appropriate way. There's a lot of peace and freedom in that. So I know Jen's got a lot of announcements tonight, and I just want to end with a moment of metta, and then we're going to go into some pretty important announcements. So hang in there for a second, but I'm going to invite you to just close your eyes, get as comfortable as you can in your posture. What moment are you meeting right now? Can you open to it? Is there your attention is already receiving it? Can there be an acknowledgement of this receptivity, this basic inclusion of love that allows the flow, that allows your life to sort of self-organize with more ease? You'll know what's right. You'll know what's skillful. You'll know what's wise because you'll feel it. Oh, of course. Oh, of course. Can we trust our hearts? Can we trust presence and receptivity? As we do that, maybe we can meet ourselves as a friend. We can meet others as friends with this very basic wish that all beings everywhere might be truly, truly happy.
Thank you so much.